Hi Miracles, welcome back to Miraculous University. We are back, officially now. I know the first week back was last week, but we're actually back in the space. What? We're back in the space now, so that's what I was gonna say. I'm not even gonna dilly-dally. We're just going to get straight to the point because we do not have time for literally anything. This slideshow is 223 slides. I'm pretty sure I thought the Mark Annual one was excruciatingly long. That one was 120 slides, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, we may be here all day, but I'm gonna try to get through this as quickly as humanly possible. There is a lot of information. Genuinely, I did not think that this video would take so long. Well, specifically the slideshow, I've been working on this for 3 weeks, a month pretty much at this point. Spent so many hours on this. I don't think you guys understand. Anyway, a lot went into this and it took a really long time, so I'm hoping we can get through this at least somewhat quickly. I mean, I know Felix very, very well. I didn't think it was going to be this hard, to be honest, to put everything together, but apparently it was, and it was a really long process, much longer than I thought, so we're just going to get straight into this. So, hello, welcome back to Miraculous University. Today, we are talking about Felix. Today is all about explaining Felix's character development and his redemption arc. If you know me, you know a Felix video has been something that I wanted to talk about for so long, so I'm really excited to kind of sit down and just dive into all things Felix. Okay, so we have an objective and then a question. We have a question pretty much for every single episode, but I added an objective today. We're official, more school-like, I guess, more professional. Anyway, so our objective is to learn more about Felix, who he is, where he comes from, why/how he got a redemption arc, and also why his story is an essential aspect of the show. Our question is, why did Felix have a redemption arc / why does he deserve a redemption arc? That's pretty much a big topic surrounding Felix, was a redemption arc, people thinking he doesn't deserve one, he doesn't deserve to have his miraculous, or he should have stayed a villain, he was a better character when he was a villain. We're gonna get into all of that in this video, okay? But before we get into this topic, obviously, we need to get into some disclaimers. I believe there's about 3 disclaimers. So the first one, obviously, is the trigger warning. This episode will discuss heavy themes of child use. I think I'm gonna use the word use only because YouTube absolutely hates any kind of topics like this, and I'm not trying to get this video blocked or taken down, so I can't actually use the word ABUSE, so I may just substitute it for the word use, but just know if I say use, that's what I'm meaning. Anyway, child use, emotional use, and neglect. DV will also be mentioned at one point. There's so huge trigger warning if that is hard for you to listen to. Obviously, as always, episodes will be split up, so if you need to skip things, feel free to, or if you just don't feel like watching this, you don't think you can, feel free to click off. It is quite a heavy topic. I honestly was having a really hard time with this slideshow because it was so I was going through the ringer emotionally. It was very hard. It was kind of put a mental strain on me. I did not think that creating this slideshow and talking about these things would be so physically and mentally draining and hard for me to do, but here we are. So anyway, just wanted to make sure we did put a trigger warning in this because we are going hardcore into some of these heavy topics, so just so you're aware. The second thing, which is a really huge thing for me, is that this video is not a theory. This is just the facts. Obviously, with every analytical thing, there's always little things that is kind of filling in the gaps, kind of a bit of a theory, but the grand scheme of things, this is not a theory. Yes, I have a bias towards Felix, but this is simply interpreting his character based on what we've been given in the show. This is not how I perceive Felix to be or act. This is just who he is. Because so many times when I talk about Felix, people are like, oh my god, that's such a good theory. It's not a theory. Me saying Felix had a redemption arc and that he is a hero, he is one of the good guys, that is not a theory. Okay? Just need everyone to understand that. It is not a theory. This is purely factual. What I talk about in this video, his character development, his past, basically everything and anything he does, this is just the facts pulled from the show. Not a theory. Okay? Moving on. The third one, which is also a really huge thing for me, I can never talk about Felix without stating this. I do not defend Felix's actions, nor am I creating this video to excuse his actions. An explanation is not a justification. Reasoning does not justify the actions. That is literally something I say all of the time. Why somebody might do something never, ever justifies what they do. It's very important to understand why someone might do something, but I hope you know that if someone is giving an explanation of something, it doesn't automatically excuse anything that they have done. So even though we're kind of talking about Felix in a very sympathetic way in this video, that doesn't automatically mean we're sympathetic to literally anything and everything that he's ever done and we're excusing everything. No. We're just talking, explaining why things are happening, you know? Anyway, I am not, nor have I ever been a Felix defender / glazer, so don't even. Anytime I make a video about Felix, there's always people in the comments being like, oh my god, Lizzie, you're the biggest Felix defender I know. Oh my god, Lizzie, you're the biggest Felix glazer I know. Don't even get me started. Now that we have all of the disclaimers out of the way, let's actually get into the video. So, first, assignment. I know you're probably like, girl, the assignment is at the end of the video. Well, we're doing it at the beginning because this is kind of like a 2-part assignment. We're going to go from the beginning and then to the end. So, Felix is one of the most mischaracterized characters in Miraculous, to be honest. Many people have warped ideas of who he is and his story, so for your assignment, we are going to be doing a pre-assessment, if you will. So I want you guys to write any ideas and feelings you have about Felix and his development before watching. Do you think he's evil still? Do you think he deserves a redemption arc? What do you know about his story? Do you think his behavior in season 6 is weird? Just like basically list anything and everything that you think about Felix and his character. Like think about Felix, anything that pops to mind about who he is, his story, blah blah blah, you know, just write it down. Just write your feelings and like what you know about Felix so far. So that way when the episode is done and you've learned so much about Felix, you can write some more stuff and you can kind of compare like how you used to think versus how you think. I guess the point is just to kind of like compare and like see growth so that way you can like fully understand what you learned. So if you want to pause the video and quickly like write out some stuff about Felix, feel free to, and then when we're done you can like go back and edit it. Okay, assignment out of the way. Here we go. So this video is going to be split into 2 parts and 3 sections. So the first part is character development, and then the 3 sections under the first part is pre-miraculous, anti-hero era, and redemption arc. And then part 2 is why. This section goes more into depth about why Felix got a redemption arc and why it's essential for him to be a hero, and also like why his story is so crucial for the show. So part 1, character development. This is section 1, pre-miraculous. In terms of Felix's past, I think it's essential for people to fully understand what's going on and the depth of it. So we're gonna go with the same structure we did for the Mark Annual video. We'll highlight what happened in the show and then we'll go back and talk about what's really being portrayed. So like with the Mark Annual episode, obviously there was the whole comic book thing and we talked about that and then we like dove into like why it was like a metaphor for homophobia, blah 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 blah. Okay, so that's what we're doing. At least for like the pre-miraculous section, or just more specifically like Felix and Colt and like their dynamic. That's what we're gonna compare and contrast. You'll see as we get into. Okay, let's go. Emily and Amelie couldn't get pregnant. Gabriel, Emily, and Natalie discovered the Peacock Miraculous and they used it to create their child. It works. Colt gets jealous and angry as he sees himself as better than Gabriel, aka more deserving of a child. Eventually, Emily feels bad and has Gabriel give him the Miraculous so they could create a child too. Gabriel offers the Miraculous and demands a royal guard to watch over his son in return. Colt is hesitant at first. He's scared of using magic. He thinks something bad will happen to him if he does. Which, side note, I'm pretty sure Emily and Gabriel knew that the Miraculous was broken and they knew something bad would happen. I think Dusu told them that because even Emily was like, we knew the risks, but we did it anyway. But I don't think Gabriel actually explained to Colt that the Miraculous was broken. I don't think Dusu explained what was going to happen. So I don't think Colt knew that something bad was going to happen to him if he used the Miraculous. I'm pretty sure that was hidden from him, which was like, that's horrible. That's kind of a side note, but like, I'm just thinking like, what could have been solved? What could have been prevented if they had just been like, hey, if you use this, you're going to end up like, offing, you know? Ultimately, Colt decides to take the offer and uses the Miraculous to create their child. From the get-go, it's evident that Colt regretted using magic. Based on how he reacts to Amelie being pregnant, it's also easy to determine that the fear of using magic was instantly turned into the fear of the child. So it's like he was scared of the Miraculous, but that fear of the Miraculous then manifested into Felix, because Felix was the one who was created from the Miraculous.
Sometime after his son was born, the Lord of War fell ill, and the weaker he grew, the more convinced he became that he was paying the price for using magic. He started to see his child as a monster, and soon his fear turned into hate.
Oh, Felix is so cute. Look at him, he's so little, just playing with his toys. Anyway, like I said, Colt was scared that something bad would happen if he used the miraculous. At first, that fear manifested in his wariness of Felix. He was afraid of him and most likely stayed away from him at any cost, basically just observing from afar. And that's the reason why we get the arm scene and then the chair scene. So like the arm scene in reference to like Amelie standing there, and then Colt like reaching out to touch her stomach, but then like jerks back, you know? And then also the scene where Felix is playing with the toys, and then we have Colt observing him from afar very creepily. However, things took a turn for the absolute extreme worst. Not long after Felix was born, Colt began getting sick, just as Emily did. His paranoia was confirmed. The fear he had for Felix turned into blatant hatred, manifested itself in many ways, and got worse over time. So he started out as just screaming monster in Felix's face repeatedly.
Monster! Monster! The miraculous child did not understand. Why didn't his father love him?
And then after that, soon began the controlling. Every aspect of Felix's life was controlled by his dad, even the simple things such as moving.
And why did he feel obligated to obey all his orders, no matter how unfair they might be? Sit! Stand! Walk! Grab!
Felix did not know that he was being controlled, but he could tell that there was something going on. Honestly, makes the ideas of senties a million times worse. Like, the fact that they're consciously aware that they're being controlled as they're being controlled, that's horrifying. Not that the control would be any better if they weren't aware of it, but I feel like the fact that they are just, like, adds this, like, depth. Anyway, it's just so sad, to be honest. Felix only realized what was going on and who he was not long before Colt died. What started out as controlling turned into harming. Colt began punching things using the hand that has the ring. We know that an item breaking releases the amok and destroys the senti, so actively doing something that could break the item means the senti's life is in danger.
Monster! Monster! Monster!
Of course, at one point, Colt punches the wall and the ring cracks, causing Felix to fall to the ground. The explanation for this is that an item breaking releases the amok. A lot of gray area there, but this video isn't about the Senti explanation. So that's a whole other story. Guys, stay tuned for Senti Club, because Senti Club, we will be talking about the whole like ring cracking, ring breaking, blah, 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 all of that stuff, okay? Make sure you stay tuned for that. Just for the context of this, and this situation specifically, cracking the ring is not as severe, which is why no amok was released. He fell to the ground instead of disappearing. This experience made Felix realize two things. One, his life was tied to the ring, so he basically figured out that he was a Senti. And two, Felix not having the rings means he's in constant danger. Why? Well, one, no ring equals no real bodily autonomy. So he doesn't get to think for himself. He doesn't get, well, I mean, he thinks for himself, but he can't really do things for himself. He doesn't really get the chance to make a choice. He has to follow whatever his dad says. He's obligated to. And then also, no ring equals someone else gets to determine not only what he does, but whether he exists or not. And that is so important, and that is so crucial. The fact that someone else having the ring, or the Peacock Miraculous, we'll get into that later, but without having those two things, his life is pretty much in danger, and that is honestly at the core of every single one of Felix's actions. Yes, he is selfish, and his actions reflect that, but you also have to understand that this is genuinely a matter of life and death. Sounds dramatic, but like, it's true. Anyway, now that we've talked about Felix's past, storyline-wise, it's time to get more analytical. There's always a real-world connection to these kinds of things. Everything has a deeper meaning. Heck, this episode isn't called representation for no reason. Okay, everything portrayed in representation is literally representation of something else. Okay? Something that's much deeper and a lot more dark than like you would expect, to be honest. Anyway, so let's dissect all of that. Obviously, once again, this is when we're going to get into a lot of the really heavy stuff. So we'll actually be directly talking about child use along with implications of DV. We'll be diving pretty deep into these topics as it is extremely important for them to be discussed. Feel free to skip this part if you need. Mental health is important and it matters. Make sure you keep yourself safe. Or if you need to just not watch, like I said, you can do that too. I want to circle back to when Amelie first got pregnant. Amelie and Colt have a similar setup to Emily and Gabriel. However, Gabriel is seen holding onto Emily and putting his ears up to her stomach, whereas Colt is seen shakingly extending his hand out to Amelie before ultimately jerking it back away from the baby. So here's Emily and Gabriel, and here's Amelie and Colt. Very different. Of course, this framework is done to highlight Colt's fear of magic and of the child. We know Colt was terrified of Felix, but this detail implies that his fear began before he even met Felix. So like obviously he was like scared and he hated Felix when he was born, but that stuff was still there like when Amelie was pregnant. It also shows us the contrast between the circumstances of their creations, aka Adrian's creation was done through love and want, whilst Felix's creation was done through obligation and jealousy. So, obligation was that they needed an heir to the throne. I think that was pretty much Colt's like motivation for creating Felix. And then jealousy, Colt wanted to be put above Gabriel and Emily. Like he sees himself better as Emily and Amelie. Not Amelie, oh my god. Emily and Gabriel, that's what I mean. And so it was like having a kid somehow made Gabriel and Emily better, but he wanted to be better, so he needed a kid. It's a whole thing, but obviously he was very jealous. However, I think there's more to this than just Colt's fear and Gabriel's lack of fear. I believe this is also there to show us the contrast between Gabriel and Emily's dynamic and Colt and Amelie's dynamic. We have Gabriel close and holding on to her because he was always there for Emily. He was loving and supporting both mama and baby physically and emotionally. He was there for every step of the way before and after the baby. Everything was done with and for her. Essentially, Emily just had a very amazing and emotionally present partner. So her pregnancy was probably really amazing because of that. Amelie, not so much, unfortunately.
Came to life. The good princess finally became pregnant.
However, all we see of Colt is his arm. His hand never even touches Amelie or her stomach. Like I mentioned, this is due to his paranoia. However, I also believe it symbolizes their relationship as a whole, but especially during the pregnancy and birth of Felix. He was never there for Amelie physically and most certainly not emotionally. Extremely hard on Amelie for sure. Pregnancy is very hard, but adding a distant or non-existent partner is one of the worst things imaginable. Obviously, she had Emily and Gabriel, but she can't spend every waking second with them. She needs that support and help from a partner. I absolutely hate Colt. Oh my god. I believe that his distance from Amelie represents Colt's neglect, which is actually what his use towards Felix started out as. So yeah, I just wanted to take a second to just kind of highlight how neglectful he was to Amelie. Like, when she needed him. I mean, he was known to be like heartless. That's one of the first things that Felix says about Colt. And so it's like, I don't think he was ever there for her and he never loved her literally through anything, but I feel like it was almost just heightened during the pregnancy because he had that fear. Words cannot describe how bad I feel for Amelie. Like, she did not deserve that. I need to see her in her villain era. Can I be honest? I need to see her get akumatized. I need her to see her like have like a Felix snapping everyone out of existence moment. I don't know how she's like so calm and like, she seems fine. And I'm like, I don't know how you do it, but okay. Anyhow, back to Colt and Felix. The story with Colt is the exact same story with most users. It starts out with little things, still extremely harmful, and it continues to get progressively worse until it becomes so bad that the behavior becomes deadly. So I actually want to talk about the progression of use, specifically with like Colt and Felix. So it started out as neglect, and then emotional use, and then control and manipulation, and then isolation, and then obviously the worst of it, the physical use. In this section, we will be diving into each aspect of these 5 points and the signs of each thing. It's pretty obvious these things were going on in the show, but as I said, it goes a little bit deeper than what some people realize. So like, specifically, for example, like the control and the isolation, and obviously parts of the physical use are very, very apparent if you're just watching the episode, but I think each one is slightly deeper than what it just like appears on the screen when you're watching the episode. So we're going to dive deeper into it. First of all, let's take a look at each type of use. I want to make sure that we all have a good understanding before diving into how these things are portrayed in the show. All information is found on this website, which if you go to the slideshow that's linked, this website thing, like it's a link, so you can like check it out for yourself, okay? But essentially we're just going to kind of go through the definition of each use. I feel like going through it will also help people kind of make the connections between like what Colt was doing and what it was like representing and stuff. Also, I'm not sure I feel like a lot of people understand the definitions of a lot of these things, but maybe not everybody. So I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we know exactly what each one is. So first of all, neglect. Neglect is any failure to provide for a child's basic needs. In addition to physical needs such as shelter, clothing, and food, children also require social and emotional care. For example, caregivers should ensure that children attend school and receive needed medical care. Essential care for children includes providing understanding and empathy. When children don't have such support, they are less likely to develop a robust, optimistic, and resilient approach to life. Neglect is the type of use most frequently reported to Child Protective Services. Often more than one form of maltreatment occurs at the same time. Okay, moving on to emotional use. Emotional use or emotional or psychological maltreatment includes behavior that attacks a child's basic emotional needs or consistently prevents such needs from being met. Emotionally abusive treatment communicates to children that they are unloved, endangered, worthless. It can include name-calling, rejection, withholding love, or threats of various consequences or punishments. Chronic yelling, swearing, and insults are also psychologically abusive, as are manipulation and mind games. Moving on to physical use. Physical use is any intentional, aggressive, or violent behavior towards a child. Not all physically abusive actions leave a mark. Evidence of physical use is not always obvious or easily seen. Physical use can include slapping, hitting, punching, kicking, shaking, shoving, burning. Physical punishment at home, or in some cases at school, is considered by many to be a form of physical use and can have long-lasting negative effects on youth. So now that we've looked over each one, you're probably already making the connections yourself to the things that they listed and then what Colt has done. Still, we're going to take the time to dive into how each one relates to the show. First one is neglect. Like I said, the neglect started way before Felix was born. Colt is a very heartless and emotionally distant person. Yes, this video is about Felix, but Amelie is also a victim in this story, and it's important that her story isn't overlooked. So once again, I just want to point out the fact that Colt was just as neglectful and abusive in a lot of ways to Amelie that he was to Felix. And I feel like, yeah, a lot of people really don't talk about that a lot. There are signs of DV within this. It's not obvious, it's not apparent in the way that it is with Colt and Felix, but it's there. I'm telling you, it is there. Anyway, when Felix did come into the picture though, there's a shot of Colt sitting in a brown chair. Felix is a couple of feet in front playing with his toys. We have the shot, he's in the spotlight. We have Colt in the chair. Very, very creepy, I gotta be honest. The positioning and the lighting on this have always been very interesting to me. This is definitely an indication of his neglect. Felix is seen in the light. For one, because Colt is keeping an eye on him, and two, this was the only time he had peace, as hurtful as that is to say. Colt is further away from Felix, showing that all he's doing is observing from afar, so he's not doing anything to Felix in a bad way, but also in a good way. He's not taking care of Felix. He's not caring for Felix. He's just observing from afar. Basically, I feel like he was doing that because he's like, this man is so evil and blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm so scared of him. He's gonna harm me. So he's like, I'm gonna stay away from you, but I'm gonna keep my eye on you so I know that, like, you're not gonna do anything, which is, oh my God. Colt is terrified of Felix. He's making sure Felix isn't going to do anything to him, never lashes out, just refuses to take care of him. However, this era didn't last long, as it wasn't long after Felix was born that Colt began getting sick. So, second of all is, obviously, emotional use. Quickly ignoring turned into hate and anger. Anger turned into yelling, and thus began the verbal use. Colt constantly screams "monster" in his face. This is representation of emotional/verbal use. Monster most certainly was not the only words screamed at Felix. I think the verbal stuff went way farther than just, screaming monster in Felix's face is bad enough, but I feel like it went a lot further than that. I don't even want to know what he had been saying to Felix, but it was horrendous, but obviously they're not going to add all of that into the show, so they just represented that verbal use as just him constantly screaming monster. It's also important to note that Felix had no idea why he was being treated this way. Like, he knew his father deemed him as bad, he knew that his father didn't love him, he knew that he was a monster in Colt's eyes, but he didn't know why. He didn't know that he was a senti, he didn't know that he was created from the miraculous, he didn't know the miraculous was broken, he didn't know anything. And it's bad enough, period. It doesn't matter if they know why or not, it's bad, but I feel like not knowing why just adds this whole other level to it. Really quickly, I wanted to point out just how little Felix is. All this started when he was a baby. And how do we know he's a baby? Well, look at the pacifier. The pacifier right there. The pacifier right there. When it all happened, he was a baby. Honestly, the pacifier and the bunny is the two things that really, really, really get me about representation. But like, since we're on the topic of how little Felix is, I did just want to bring up, like, a tiny little point, and it's that many people justify horrid behavior towards little kids because they're too young, they won't remember. However, this is actually the most important time for development. Babies need a comforting and loving environment in order for their brains to fully develop correctly. They may not remember use in the way that school-aged children, teens, and adults do, but as I said, the use alters brain development and can have an impact on the way they form attachments. This particularly isn't something Miraculous has heavily talked about. However, I hope that this is something they dive into in the Felix episode. You've obviously seen the initial effects of the use. We'll dive into that later, obviously. And so I would love good representation of the long-lasting effects Colt's use has on Felix and Amelie from here on out.
And why did he feel obligated to obey all his orders, no matter how unfair they might be?
Sit! Stand! Look! Grab!
Okay, moving on to manipulation and control. Colt would use the ring to control Felix's every move. This is representation of controlling and manipulative parenting. This kind of parenting often creates a sense of no bodily autonomy. Sound familiar? Senties have always been a metaphor for this kind of parenting / treatment. So it's like, yeah, Adrian, Kagami, Felix, they're all senties, but the reason why they're senties is because they're trying to have a way to represent that controlling and manipulative parenting. Okay, next up is isolation. Yeah, but it's time to talk about the bunny stuffed animal. My biggest hop, actually. So we'll talk about what it means and like what it's a metaphor of.
If he became fond of anyone who displeased his father,
No!
an order from his father was enough to trouble his feelings.
To be honest, this is one of the most heartbreaking parts. It's the one thing that always gets me bawling my eyes out, like I said. We first see Felix outside surrounded by so many flowers and colors. Everything was so bright and warm. Felix seemed at peace, he's happy, but why? Well, first of all, he's alone. His father's nowhere in sight. But also, he has a cute little bunny stuffed animal to keep him company. He has like a bestie. He has a bestie. And he's just, living his oh my god, I'm actually gonna start crying. Now notice what Felix says while this is being shown. And if he becomes fond of anyone who displeases his father. This indicates that this was not about a stuffed animal. Instead, the stuffed animal represents all of the people Felix loved and cared for. I mean, like, yes, a stuffed animal could displease Colt because, Felix could have grown an attachment to the stuffed animal. He could feel safe and comforted with the stuffed animal, and Colt couldn't have that, so he would rip it away from Felix, which probably did happen. But once again, this episode's called representation, so whatever it is definitely not what's actually there, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't doubt that there was stuffed animals that Colt ripped up, but I feel like more so it just represents all of the people that he loved and cared for.
He became fond of anyone who displeased his father?
No!
An order from his father was enough to trouble his feelings.
Now the next thing that happens is Colt yells no, and we hear the bunny being ripped up. After that, we see the bunny lying on the ground, its arm ripped off. Important to note that it's lying in the exact same way Felix is after the rings cracked. Now there's honestly so much I think this represents. One, just visually thinking, so taking in just the bunny into consideration, not what he says or what's going on, I believe this represents Felix's childhood being ripped from him. There's so much innocence, love, and comfort, etc. that comes from childhood, so typically anything that comes from a child, baby toys, baby / kid items, stuffed animals, like a pacifier, those kinds of things, is used to represent that. Any one of those items being damaged or lost is usually representation of a childhood coming to an end. Felix was exposed to the worst of it from a young age. In fact, that's all he knows. So the bunny being ripped up could also be a portrayal of that childhood that was torn away from him. Focusing more on Felix's words, like I said, the bunny most likely represents anyone and everyone that Felix loved or cared for. He wasn't allowed to be friends with anyone. Any family members weren't allowed to see him, his mom included. And why? Well, because, Felix would have been happy, he would have been comfortable and felt safe with those people, and Colt just was out to completely destroy him and anything about him. So if Felix is happy, if he feels safe, if he feels comforted in any kind of way, that is bad, because it's how can Felix suffer? Because once again, Colt sees Felix as this monster, and you can't have a monster just happy. You can't have a monster safe. Felix ruined Colt's life. So obviously anything Felix does, anything he says, it can't be good, because then Felix is living a good life, and why should a monster live a good life? That is like his mentality. So starting off with friends. In these kinds of situations, people often find comfort in outside sources as they know it's the only place they're safe. Yes, season 3 through season 5, Felix is very skeptical of anyone who wasn't a Senti. He doesn't want friends, he pushes people away. So like, some people might say that Felix just like never liked having friends, like that's just who he is. However, that's most certainly not true. Like that's not how he is at all. I don't think Felix is really one to do that stuff. I just think that pushing people away is actually just a learned trait from Colt. So it's like Felix was never inclined, I guess, to push people away. He was just so used to having to, or having Colt push people away, that that's just what he's used to. Obviously, we'll get into that a little bit later, but just know that the Felix who doesn't like anybody, the Felix who doesn't want any friends, that's not Felix, the true Felix. As shown, Colt yells no, and then the bunny is ripped up. There are two implications of this. Either Colt is the one to force Felix to stop being friends with them / isolate Felix from them, or Colt controlled Felix to do it himself, forced him to harm them in some way, or just break off any relationship / contact. Oh my god, I cannot read today. It's actually driving me nuts. This makes sense because as the bunny is being ripped up, he says, an order from his father was enough to trouble his feelings. That order being the forcing of him to end relations and isolate himself. So either Felix was like, I'm sorry, my son can't be friends with you, and he would like forcefully isolate Felix from everyone, or he would control Felix to harm people in some kind of way to get them away from him. Now adding on to that and going to the whole learned trait thing, taking this into consideration, things fit together like a puzzle piece. Colt controls Felix to stay away from anyone and everyone, no matter how much he desired love and care for them. Led to Felix self-isolating because he knew what would happen, what his father would do / force him to do if he did. This is something that carried on subconsciously or intentionally. I don't know. Even after Colt died. Of course, there are other factors to this, but we'll get into that later. All I really want you guys to understand is that Felix being isolated during the span of Miraculous, like season 3 through season 5, was something that he carried on because of what Colt was doing to him. Okay, next thing is family. One thing that I want to point out about the episode Felix is that it's heavily implied that Felix, Amelie, and Colt would only ever come over and hang out when Felix and Adrian were little. Essentially, it's very apparent that they hadn't seen each other in a very long time. So like at the beginning of the episode Felix, when Amelie and Colt first come over, yeah, it's pretty obvious that they hadn't seen each other in a really long time. So just a couple examples are Amelie saying, look how much you've grown, Adrian saying mom when he first sees Amelie, being super confused and only making the connection after Gabriel mentions that it's his aunt.
Mom?
Look at how much you've grown.
I'm sure Adrian is delighted to have such a timely visit from his aunt today of all days.
And Amelie?
And then some other pointers are Adrian's reaction to Felix. So he's like, it's so good to see you again, and then hugs him. It definitely gives, I haven't seen you in so long, I low-key forgot you existed. And then also Amelie talking about them in the past, Felix and Adrian heavily reminiscing on the past.
Good to see you again. Do you remember when they used to have so much fun pretending to be each other? Once they had you and Emily fooled for a whole weekend. We laughed so hard.
Do you remember our shooting contests? Oh, do you have that chessboard we used to play all the time? Grab a deck of cards too while you're up there. You still doing magic? How about karate? Are you still practicing? Of course.
Now, why do I bring all this up? Well, I believe that this is just all evidence of Colt's isolation. Adrian and Felix seemed close. Amelie seemed close with her sister and Gabriel. They were a family. It most certainly wasn't just natural distance, like the two families just slowly drifting apart. So what changed? Well, as I stated, Felix and Adrian were close. Not to mention, in the episode Gabriel Agreste, Felix is seen looking fondly at Emily, in the same way he looks at his mom, which is definitely an indication that Felix was close to Emily as well. Essentially, all of this is to say that Felix found immense care, comfort, and love within the Agreste family. They were his escape. It's also implied that Gabriel and Emily would babysit Felix for many days, like, because Amelie was like, they had you fooled for a full weekend, so it's like, they would babysit Felix for like an extended amount of time, or at least like the two families would hang out for an extended amount of time. This was probably the only time that Felix felt safe and cared for by people other than his mom, which also I think it's important to note that sometimes people who come from these families just see this stuff as like what's normal. They see what their parents are doing, how they're treating people as normal, because that's all they know. But with Felix's story, it's very apparent that he knew that it was wrong from the very beginning, and the reason why is because I think he was so close to the Agreste family. He saw how they acted. He saw how Emily took care of him. He saw how loving they were and how loving they were to him. That is what made him realize that what his father was doing was not normal. Which kind of sucks, because in a way it's like Felix got to see what he could have had. I don't even want to think about that. Also, that's not to say that like Amelie wasn't caring and loving to Felix. Obviously she was, but once again, like going back to the isolation thing, Amelie supposedly never got to spend like a whole lot of time with Felix. Plus, and I hate to say this, but any time she was nice or good to Felix probably landed her in some kind of punishment. Hopefully by saying punishment you guys will know what I'm implying, which is once again why DV was a trigger warning. Anyway, so Colt knew this. He knew that Felix found love and comfort and safety in the Agreste family, so he ripped them away from Felix. Kind of going back to the whole thing where I was saying that like Felix is a monster so he has to suffer, blah blah blah. Remember, Colt blamed Felix for his sickness, and the only way to make Colt feel better was to make Felix suffer beyond comprehension. Felix could not feel loved, he could not feel safe, and he could not do anything on his own. So if there was anyone who gave that to Felix, it would be instantly taken away from him. Colt isolated Felix from the Agreste family, the only people besides his mom that he was fond of. And if he grew fond of anyone that displeased his father, no. Displeased in this context essentially just means anyone who protected Felix in any kind of capacity. So yeah, at the end of the day, I think Felix is the reason why they stopped hanging out with each other. That's why Adrian and Felix hadn't seen each other in so long. It's hard to get an exact timeline because years and ages aren't stated. However, based on everything we know, Adrian and Felix were probably like 6, 7, 8 maybe when they last saw each other, all because of Colt's psychotic behavior. Unlike the friends portion, I don't think Felix was controlled to harm or distance himself from them. I think Colt just refused to let Felix see them. Next, moving on to his mom. Obviously, as we've discussed, the bunny represents anyone Felix loved and who loved him. If there's one person Felix cares for more than anything, it's his mom. Above all else, this is what the bunny most likely represents. So, interesting thing to note, in the episode Gabriel Agreste, the attendees are given different masks. Each mask looks like some kind of animal. We never particularly see the clearest shot of the full mask of Amelie's full mask, but it somewhat appears to be a bunny. So we can see the face right here and then the bunny ears, question mark. There's actually two aspects I wanted to highlight. One, obviously the stuffed animal being ripped away from Felix shows us that he was isolated from Amelie a lot of the time. Two, I think it's also important to pay attention to the positioning of the bunny. It's an exact mimic of Felix's positioning, implying that what happened to the bunny is exactly what happened to Felix, or like what would happen to Felix. In a way, it foreshadows what was going to happen. Also furthers the idea that if they destroy things, if they hit things, it's only a matter of time before those things become you, which is like a pretty common rhetoric in terms of like DV. But in terms of Amelie, this could imply that they both almost suffered the same fate. We'll get into what fate means later, but for now I want to go back to some things I brought up earlier, which is obviously back when we were talking about kind of like the neglect of Colt in terms of Amelie. I talked about how Colt was very neglectful physically and emotionally towards Amelie during the pregnancy. I wanted to bring this back up because I think this all goes to highlight Colt's behavior towards Amelie. He was an abusive man and he had abusive tendencies even before Felix, before the Miraculous, before he got sick. Obviously he was very harmful to Felix, but Amelie is rarely discussed, and I wish it were. They are both victims in this story. I think they endured just as much as each other. The neglect, the yelling, the isolation, the control, and the physical harm were also extended to Amelie, and the bunny shows representation of that, which is exactly what I mean by they almost met the same fate. The physical use, which we'll dive into that next, was extended onto Amelie as well. Obviously, that's a very big claim, so I just wanted to reiterate that it's not confirmed that Amelie represents the bunny, but it does make sense. Either way, Amelie is still most certainly just as traumatized as Felix, as she had to witness a lot of Colt's behavior towards Felix. Going back to the main point at hand, isolation, just like with friends and family, the bunny being taken away and ripped up is just symbolism of Felix being isolated from his mom because he found love and comfort in her. He felt happy and safe and and Colt couldn't let Felix live in any kind of peace. Which, quick side note, since we're on the topic of Amelie and Felix, we'll get deeper into this later, but I always say that Felix was very skeptical of anyone who wasn't a senti because of his father. He hated non-senti humans, every single one of them, even if he knew that they weren't particularly bad, so like Ladybug, Cat Noir. Many people will argue, oh, but he still loves his mom, but he loves his mom and she's not a senti, so that's not true. You can't say that he hates the world because he loves his mom. Honestly, I think that's a very diminishing claim. That is not how trauma like that works. You can be just like Felix, hate everyone, and still have a comfort person or a comfort people. His mom went through the exact same stuff that he did. You think he'd see her as the monster? No. They are in the same boat. Of course he's going to love and protect her, no matter what, even though she isn't a senti. At the end of the day, it's not particularly the fact that they're sentis that makes him want to protect them, but because he sees them as victims. Felix being a senti made him a victim, so he sees Adrian and Kagami as victims as well. And it's like, because his father treated him the way he did, it's like he almost thinks that all sentis are treated that way, that all sentis hate their parents just as much as he hated Colt. Obviously that's not true, but Felix always struggled to see that. He can't imagine why Kagami would love her mom. Why, when he snapped Kagami's mom out of existence, she was upset. When he snapped Gabriel out of existence, why Adrian was upset. Because he would have loved to have somebody come in and do what Felix did. Anyway, that's kind of jumping into emotion, but I wanted to say that. That's why he set on saving them, setting them free. He wants justice for victims of use. So yeah, Amelie is included in that. Plus, Amelie has shown nothing but love and comfort to him his whole entire life. That is why he trusted her. And in fact, that's actually the only reason why he began to trust Marinette in emotion. We're kind of, flip-flopping back between things, but I just want you to know that like love and comfort is at the core of who Felix trusted, and he never allowed anybody to show him that love and that comfort. I mean, a lot of people that Adrian was friends with, they would have done that. They would have been open and accepting of Felix, but he didn't allow that to. It's like Marinette kind of forced it on him. She's the one that went up to him and hugged him and told him that whole story in emotion, so he was forced to hear it. He was forced to see that love and that comfort in her, which is why he began to trust her. But yeah, with Amelie, it was like she was always that way with him no matter what. So obviously he's going to trust and love someone who was deeply loving and caring towards him, which is also like why he looks at the painting of Emily in that kind of way, because she was so loving and caring towards him. Like, of course he's not going to hate her, and he's not going to hate Amelie. Point blank period. Anyway, just wanted to add that in. Moving on, as I've previously stated, the ripping of the bunny is foreshadowing of what would happen to Felix. This illustrates the saying that if they hit punch something, it's only a matter of time before they hit/punch you. Time for the real world connection. Like I said, for everything that happens in the play, there's a real world connection to it. Yes, in the show, Colt hits the ring and the amok was almost released, but that's not what's being portrayed. Think of it like this: a human can't live without a body and a heartbeat. A senti can't live without an item and an amok. A heartbeat is a form of life for us, and an amok is a form of life for them. A real-life heartbeat equals an amok in the miraculous/senti world. Releasing an amok is the same as stopping a heartbeat. This also makes the item the amok is in equivalent to a body. It's almost like the item and the amok is the life, but the life form has just manifested itself as a separate entity. So it's like our life, our soul, is in us, but it's like, for them, it's in the item, if that makes sense. So the body equals the ring. A heartbeat equals an amok. So let's keep that in mind, and let's revisit Colt and Felix in this scene.
Monster! Monster! Monster!
Colt slams his hand on a table. The ring is not hitting the table. Then he slams it again. This time the ring was facing down. He does it one more time. This time he punches a wall, and that is when we see the ring crack. Once again, the body equals a ring. Amok equals heartbeat. So what this is telling us is that the real world connection to punching the ring is hurting Felix. Colt is not punching the ring. Colt is not punching the ring into the wall. He's punching Felix. I want you guys to hear that loud and clear. By hitting the ring, he's hitting Felix. That is what that is representation of. No ifs, ands, or buts, that is what it is. It happens so often, and Colt does it so hard that Felix almost passes away. Him falling to the ground, that is him almost passing away, which, I mean, even in the miraculous world, like what was happening with the whole ring, that is what's happening, but I just really think it's important to make the connection of it's not really the ring cracking, it's his heart almost stopping. At the end of the day, this literally had nothing to do with Felix being a senti. This is all about Colt hating Felix so much that he would almost off him. So basically his amok almost being released is like his heart almost stopping. I'm sorry, this has gotten like so dark. Now really quickly, I want to bring up Werepapas because I see a lot of people trying to correlate what Colt did in terms of almost breaking Felix's ring to Marinette breaking Adrian's rings. Many people believe that Adrian probably fell to the ground in the same way Felix did, but let me say this loud and clear. These are not the same, not even in the slightest. Because listen, what's going on in Werepapas, that is actually what happened. With Felix and what happened in representation, him breaking the ring, that's not what happened. Like I said, the ring equals a body. So when he's punching the ring, he's not punching the ring, he's punching Felix. Kagami had her rings broken and nothing happened to her. In fact, she didn't even notice. Felix fell to the ground because he was being hurt. He almost passed away. That is what makes the difference. Breaking the ring doesn't always affect them negatively, but harming your child in that way does. That is why he falls to the ground. Please do not correlate Felix in representation to Adrian and Werepapas. They are not the same. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that tries to put Marinette and Colt on the same wavelength, which is disgusting. I feel like it almost in a way diminishes what Felix went through. Marinette is not the same as Colt. This situation is not the same as the one in representation. Anyway, now that we have that out of the way, we can finally get to the good part. The death of Colt. Everybody, round of applause. And we are also done with the real world connection portion, so we will be going back to just like the show, right? Because before there was like what was being shown in representation versus what it meant. Now we're just talking about like what's being shown in the show. We don't really need to dive into like with the real world connection of it all. So we're going to be reflecting back to one of the other slides that we had where we were saying like the ring breaking made realize that he was a senti and that his life was like constantly in danger. Felix got his ring back once Colt had died. For once Felix felt safe, his life was no longer in constant danger. However, oh wait, no, he's not. He's still not free. The Peacock Miraculous also has the ability to take his life too. He was back to square one, except this time Felix does have bodily autonomy. He may be in danger, but he still is in control of his life, which means he actually gets the chance to fight. So he does. But anger and hurt overtook him and things took a turn for the worst. And what do I mean by that exactly? Well, in order to figure everything out, we need to move on to our second section of part 1, character development, anti-hero era. So up until now, everything that has happened to Felix has been before the beginning of Miraculous. Now we are going to be moving on to the part of his character that we have seen firsthand, pre-redemption arc, obviously. First, I wanted to highlight the change within Felix. I feel like that is something that people always overlook. This also goes to show that Felix isn't inherently evil, just corrupted and angry.
Good to see you again.
Do you remember when they used to have so much fun pretending to be each other?
So that was just like the beginning of the episode Felix. Notice how Adrian instantly lights up. He was so excited to see Felix, and based on what Amelie, Adrian, and Felix have all said, and like the way they talk about the past, that dark, cold exterior is not who Felix is. This is also further justified by the way he acts around his mom. That gentle, caring side we saw in Pretension isn't random, it's not new, it's always been a part of him. To me, this genuinely furthers how use affects the way people act, talk, and perceive things in people. So it's like how Felix acts now is not how he always has acted. I think how he's acting right now after his redemption arc is how he always used to act when he was little and when things weren't as bad, when he actually felt, loved and comforted and safe, which is actually another huge point I wanted to make. Use may not be a justification for one's actions, but the psychological effects use has on the mind do explain how Felix is and how he acts. Remember, explanation does not equal justification. I want to take a quick second to go over some of the effects so we can begin to make those connections as we go through these episodes. So actually, due to time, I'm actually going to skip these slides, so if you want to look at this stuff yourself, feel free to, but we do not have time for this. So we're going to skip. Just know that there are psychological effects to abuse, and we do see that reflected in Felix. But 2 effects that I will point out is 1, skepticism of people. It is really common to constantly be in fear that all people, anyone, is out to get you and harm you in the way that the person that hurt you did. And then 2, anger. Sometimes this can be a learned behavior from a person's user, or it can be a result of use. No one deserves to be treated like that, and while some people struggle believing that they deserve that treatment, others easily understand that that is not the case and often feel angry at anyone and everyone, their user, the world, the universe, etc., because they did not deserve that. They had their childhood stolen away from them. And then obviously some people are on both sides of this, which I feel like is probably a lot more common, where it's like you know what they did was wrong, but somehow you're still in that like, I deserved this. I'm not good enough, like that is why I was treated that way. Anger is what we see represented in Felix the most. His words, his actions, all done out of anger and hatred for his father and the life he was given as a child. We'll get more into this when we get into the episode Emotion, but I wanted you to keep that in mind. I feel like he was very angry with what had happened to him, and he never actually dealt with it or took time to understand it. He just acted on that anger. Anyway, moving back to the episode analysis, one of the biggest parts of Felix's character is saving Adrian and Kagami, but obviously she came in later. This is an argument I will somewhat counter later, as I don't think it was ever truly his motivation, but for the sake of the story, we'll highlight it. I want to talk about the first interaction they have in Adrian's room.
My father thought it would be too hard on me, considering everything that's happened this year. You've every right to be mad at me. You always do everything your father tells you to do. He's very protective of me.
Felix had a very cold exterior. He doesn't smile and barely talks. Mind you, Felix had just escaped his father at this point. He's the most vulnerable and withdrawn. In fact, the first words he ever spoke, apart from the hello uncle at the beginning of the episode, were, "Do you do everything your father tells you to?" This is extremely telling, especially in terms of the idea that Felix only opened up and trusted people who are senties. Also notice how it's only when Adrian alludes to the fact that he does everything his father tells him to that Felix smiles for the first time. The reason he smiles and hugs Adrian is because it was in that moment that Felix confirms to himself that Adrian is a senti too. Mind you, Felix didn't know that he was a senti until not long before Colt died. I'm sure it wasn't until he passed away that Felix went to Amelie and asked what the heck was going on, why his life was linked to the ring, how he was created. Amelie most likely explained the whole story that we learned in representation, hence why Gabriel and Amelie were never seen using the miraculous. Felix didn't tell that bit because he didn't know. No one did. That's probably very confusing to hear because I just said that Felix knows that Adrian was a senti, so let me lay it out all on the line. Maybe it was a miracle. This line proves to us that Gabriel and Emily were very secretive about Adrian's creation. Colt did not know and never knew they used a miraculous, nor did Amelie. Why did they keep it a secret, especially when Amelie and Colt also use a miraculous? I don't know. No idea. All I know is that the only implications within the show are that neither Felix nor Amelie ever knew Adrian was a senti until the episode Felix. So basically, Gabriel and Emily never told Amelie about how they had found the miraculous or the fact that they had used it. Amelie had no clue and neither did Felix. They don't know any of the details. They only know that Adrian is a senti based on what Felix has discovered when spending time with Adrian, which is why, like I said, Felix didn't explain any of it in representation. He didn't talk about Natalie. He didn't talk about them spending months, like, trying to search for it. We only know that because of things that we've seen in the show, like Revelation. I think it was Revelation. We saw like pictures of them together, like finding the miraculous. And then also in Passion, we also see, those pictures of Emily, Gabriel, and Natalie searching for the miraculous. So we know that, but Felix doesn't know that. Also, it's not particularly important because he was just focusing on his story. But yeah, that's essentially why he didn't show that, because he doesn't know. He doesn't know. He can't tell, like, Marinette about how they use the miraculous and why, because he does not know. All he knows is that Gabriel had the miraculous and then he gave it to Colt, which is exactly why that's shown in representation. Anyway, moral of the story is that Amelie did know one thing. The Peacock Miraculous came from Gabriel. Knowing that information made Felix skeptical of Gabriel. I think Felix theorized from the beginning that Adrian was a senti. Probably why we get Felix looking at Adrian like this. Also, at the end of the episode Felix, Amelie was talking about the fact that Felix had asked for Amelie to tell him the story of the Graham Divinity twin rings a million different times. So he's probably just trying to piece everything together, being like, is he a senti? Is he not a senti? But yeah, I'm pretty sure Amelie was like, oh, we used a miraculous, and Felix was like, where did the miraculous come from? And she's like, oh yeah, it was something that like Gabriel gave to us. And that's how he knew that Gabriel had the Peacock Miraculous and like used it to create Adrian. In Adrian's bedroom, I think his observations continued, and it wasn't until Adrian brought up his father in a way that gave off a sense of control that Felix was able to ask. Instantly after Adrian responds, we see a smile, he becomes soft and welcoming, and even hugs Adrian. Like I said, he went into instant protective mode, most likely because he believed all Sentis were being treated the way he was. I truly believe he thinks they all feel what he feels, thinks what he thinks, and the only way to protect them is to do exactly what he had been doing to himself, isolating and destroying. Which brings us to the next thing Felix does. I know so many of you are probably like, girl, what are you on about? Felix literally only hugs Felix so he could steal his phone and snoop around. Which, like, yeah, but I promise he did this as a way to protect. Like I said, Felix deems anyone who's not a Senti as the bad guy because of the way that he was treated by someone who wasn't a Senti. He believes everyone is out to harm not only him, but also the other Sentis. Not only was Felix used to isolating himself from others because of his father, but he also grew to do it himself as a safety mechanism. So I kind of already brought that up, where it was kind of like a learned thing from Colt that he carried on. Though it's extremely unhealthy, sometimes people will see isolation as the only solution, the only correct form of protection. You can't be hurt if no one is around. Felix is kind of the king of self-isolation, which is why episodes like Emotion and Pretension are so important and crucial. At the end of the day, Felix took Adrian's phone and snooped around to find ways to protect him. Like I keep saying, horrible behavior, he shouldn't have done that. He's a terrible person for doing that. We're just giving reasoning here. There's a reason that he did it, so we're going to talk about it. When Felix found out Adrian had friends and that there was a way to get rid of these friends, he did. Remember, not a Senti, out to get every Senti. I think Felix genuinely believed that every single person was in some way out to get him. They are all being fake in those videos as a way to get to Adrian. He resorted to insults because it's like belittling them is the only way to make him feel better about getting rid of them, metaphorically.
Bros are always there for their guys. Bros are always there. Blah, blah, blah. Moron.
One little sunbeam for a rainbow to appear.
Loser. Uploaded a few jokes for you, starting with...
Freak. So you can count on me, my Adrikins.
Chloe, just as annoying as usual.
So even though he is being mean and he's belittling people, it doesn't automatically mean Felix was completely cold and heartless. Yes, he believes people were evil and isolation was the only way to go, but that didn't mean that it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean that he can't sense genuine love and yearn for those connections. It's not what he actually wants. Isolation, not having people, not having connections, not having relationships, it's not what he actually wants. It's just what he's been conditioned to believe, whether by Colt or by himself. Because once again, Colt did it to get Felix away from everyone so he could suffer. Felix did it because he was afraid that every person was just like Colt. The reason I bring that up is because of a little detail I noticed recently about Marinette's confession to Adrian.
Adrian, I love you. I'll always be there if you need me.
Pathetic.
It's very brief, and I never really noticed it before, so here's it slowed down. Did you catch it? If you're listening to this, you most certainly did not catch it. But that's okay, because we're going to analyze this. There are so many videos that Felix reacts to. Here's his expressions after every single one of them, obviously, minus Marinette's. So, Chloe, Nino, Rose, Max, you can see his face is very mean. He just looks mad. Yeah, just very cold and very angered. But with Marinette, his initial expression is completely different. So you can see right here, there's that cold, mean, angry look, but with Marinette, it looks like this. And like I said, he has the exact same expression for every single person, except for Marinette. The fact that they deliberately chose to make him have the exact same reaction to every single video except for Marinette's video is very telling. He looks very sad and vulnerable and hurt in a lot of ways. She was confessing her love to Adrian. She was telling him that no matter what, he could count on her, that she'd always be there for him. And like that was his expression to hearing that. There is so much hurt in his eyes. It could come from never experiencing that kind of love, or potentially it's a look of despair. Like a part of him was regretting what he was about to do because of how much she seemed to care. However, it's also important to note just how quickly his expression changed. I think this just goes to show how much that cold exterior, that meanness, that isolation and anger is just a facade he had to keep himself safe. It's moments like this where you see his true self slipping through the crack. Also, this expression and the switch in expression just confirms that the writers didn't decide to randomly make Felix good. They always knew his story, his journey, and his purpose. Felix was always meant to be the good guy. I don't think they would have added moments like that where he is genuinely vulnerable especially to someone who's showing love and comfort in that way for no reason. I feel like they knew he was just a hurt child from the very, 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 very beginning, and they showed signs of it. I feel like this also adds more context to emotion and why Felix ended up trusting Marinette. All he's seen from her is genuine love and care for Adrian. At first, he probably believed it was also a facade in the way he thought everyone else's was. In a way, his change in facial expression kind of gives, dang, that was good acting. You almost had me fooled for a sec that you actually loved him. But obviously, none of it's real, so I'm just gonna call you pathetic. So having Marinette yet again show that love and care in person too showed Felix that she was always genuine. She really did mean what she said, something Felix couldn't grasp but always wanted. Anyway, continuing on, I think the reason why Felix sent that video was to get them away from him, away from Adrian. It was never meant to make Adrian look bad or give him a bad reputation, though it was obviously the result of doing that. He was only doing it to get people away from Adrian. Be mean and hurt people before they can harm Adrian was most likely his mindset. Personally, I think Felix was just projecting here, as most of his actions are just projection of his own hurt and anger. He's also very impulsive, so wasn't thinking of any of the consequences, which obviously is something we see a lot from him. Also, from the beginning of the episode, there's emphasis on the Graham Divinelli twin rings. If I'm not mistaken, this is the first time they were emphasized like this. I haven't actually sat down and watched season 3, so I don't know, but I'm pretty sure this was like the first time. I mean, I think obviously we had seen the rings before, but I don't think they had been like emphasized like this. When Felix first enters the scene, the ring is emphasized yet again, but this time with Felix in the frame and Amelie being the one to bring it up.
Hello, Uncle.
Oh, how sweet! You're still wearing your wedding band. You must have Emily's too, I imagine. You never replied to my message about that. I'd still like to get the rings back, you know. And they're very dear to me too, Gabriel. Those jewels have always been in the Graham Divinelli family, not the Agrests.
Felix goes to give a handshake to Gabriel, but he doesn't give his hand. It goes to a shot where we can see the back of Gabriel, his hands, and Felix with his hand extended. We see Gabriel's hand twitch, and then it changes frames to focus on Felix's face. He looks down towards Gabriel's hand and then looks up questioningly. Only then does Amelie point out the rings. This shot and Emily's smugness, aka her asking for the rings back, foreshadows Felix stealing the rings. It also gives context to the scene where Felix is talking to Hawkmoth, stating that he's looking for a piece of jewelry too. Knowing what we know now, it could be that Felix was really looking for the Peacock Miraculous. However, since the emphasis is solely on the rings and the Peacock Miraculous doesn't come into play in terms of Felix until the episode Gabriel Agreste, I doubt it was what he was talking about. It was always about stealing the rings. Lastly, I want to talk about the ending of the episode.
You put my favorite cousin in danger. He's right. No apology can ever be enough. I just hope I can learn from this and come back to see you as a better person someday. I really am sorry. I'll do my best to make it up to you.
Goodbye, Felix.
I'm really lucky to have you.
Isolation has always worked for him, but trying to do the same thing for Adrian blew up in his face. He ended up hurting Adrian instead of protecting him, a pattern we see very often with Felix. So because of this, he needed to switch tactics. Felix hugs Adrian and says, "I really am sorry. I'll do my best to make it up to you." He sounds very genuine. His facial expression is soft and reassuring, a face that only shows up when he's telling the truth. He's not a very good actor, is what I'm trying to say. Note that this is said right before he shakes Gabriel's hand and steals the ring. It feels like he said that because he knew that he was going to take the rings. Why protect Adrian when you can set him free? The latter is much more effective. So him saying, "I'm gonna make it up to you," is him being like, "I'm gonna steal the rings and I'm gonna set you free." Based on the ending of the episode, I think this furthers the idea that Emily did not know that Adrian was a Senti and the Amok was in the Graham Divinelli twin rings. Future episodes kind of prove that she knew just as much as Felix, so it's likely that he told Amelie everything not long after he figured it out. So like, Amelie knows that Adrian is a Senti, but I think that's just because Felix told her later on. I do genuinely think Amelie wanted the rings because they were a part of her family. They are an heirloom, so technically Felix is the only one who should have them. So at the end when she's like talking about how she wanted the rings and then she wanted to give it to Felix, I think she was being genuine there. She did really want the rings back. I don't think it had anything to do with like Adrian being a Senti. And I think it's very apparent because of the way she talks about it. At the end of the day, the episode Felix is the first episode where we are introduced to his character, so most of what's being portrayed is misleading as they are trying to set him up as a villain. Plus, as I mentioned, he had just gotten away from his abusive father at this point, so of course his character is going to be the worst that it is. Or was, I don't know. Anyway, you get my point. Acting out for no reason is common for situations like this, which is probably why we see him being mean to Adrian, putting cheese under his pillow, etc. It has nothing to do with him trying to save Adrian, he's just being an a-hole for no reason, essentially. Not an excuse, once again, just common behavior. Which means we're moving on to the next episode, Gabriel Agreste. From the beginning, Felix knew how he had been created, or at least like, from the beginning meaning after Colt had passed away. However, mind you, Colt was the only one who had it. Colt was the only one who used it. Amelie probably had no knowledge of what the Miraculous was or how to use it. The only thing she did know was that it had come from Gabriel, and that's why Felix was able to determine that Adrian was also a Senti. And because of Gabriel and Amelie's secrecy, even Colt didn't know the full extent of things. We know that the Grimoire, the Peacock Miraculous, and the Butterfly Miraculous were all found in cahoots. However, like I said, no one besides Emily, Gabriel, and Natalie knew about it. Felix didn't make the connection that Hawkmoth was Gabriel until he started using the Peacock Miraculous. So it's like he didn't automatically think, oh, you know, Hawkmoth is Gabriel in Felix, because he didn't know that Gabriel had the Butterfly Miraculous. So if he did, then like, yeah, he would have known. But the reason why he doesn't make the connection that Gabriel is Shadow Moth is because season 4 is when he actually starts using the Peacock Miraculous. It's also important to note that Felix did know that Gabriel used the Miraculous at some point, but there was no way of knowing that he still had it until he saw it with his own eyes. That is what the episode Gabriel Agreste is all about, confirming that Gabriel was Shadow Moth and that he did have the Peacock Miraculous. Which leads us to our second episode analysis. Gabriel Agreste is pretty much just used to set up the finale and Felix stealing the Miraculous, or the Peacock Miraculous. So there's not a whole lot to go over, but I do want to highlight a few things.
Supervillain Shadow Moth also has 2 Miraculous brooches in his possession, and they're what give him his powers. We can figure out from this that a Miraculous can either make a superhero or a supervillain. It's all riding on who wears it.
I hope we'll get to see some superheroes while we're here in Paris, Mom.
That would be pretty exciting, wouldn't it, darling? Mwah.
So 2 things. First of all, because of Felix's prior knowledge, I believe that Felix thought that it was a possibility that Gabriel was Shadow Moth, but he didn't know for sure. This sets up Felix's interest in the Peacock Miraculous. The second thing I wanted to highlight is Felix and Amelie's dynamic. We saw a little bit of it in Felix, but I think this episode gives us a better look. So like, notice the difference between Felix's face when he's looking at the screen. Once again, very cold, very focused, very angry in a way. But when he's with his mom, do you see his face? Like, he's just lit up like a light bulb. His eyebrows are raised, his eyes are wide, and he's like smiling. Like, you can just see he's very genuine, and there's just so much love and comfort there. You can see it. He's very gentle, he looks happy and full of so much love. It honestly makes me so happy that they are so close. Felix needs a loving parent like her, and this one detail is extremely important in my opinion. Many people will say that Felix's behavior with Kagami and his behavior in season 6 is odd for his character. However, that's most certainly not true. His behavior is an exact replica of the way he acts and treats his mom. This shows that his behavior is not new, it's always been there. I made a TikTok video about this in the past, but essentially there's always been 2 parts of his personality, his cold side and his warm, softer side. The soft side wasn't created when he met Kagami. He just tapped into it more. He's always been Golden Retriever vibes. And we know this because he acts like this around his mom. I also think this draws huge contrast between Felix and the actual villains. He has never been set up to be someone like Gabriel or Lila because of that little detail. Notice how they never really have moments like this. They don't have moments with a loved one like that. There's never a moment like the one Felix had with Marinette's video confession, where we see hurt and regret etched across his face. Sure, Gabriel has had his emotional moments, but it's never portrayed like this. Lila has never been like that, which is why I always found the comparison between the two very weird. I just think this is another sign of him being the hero. Like, they would not frame Felix this way, they would not add these details in if he was meant to be the villain. Moving on with the story, Felix notices the peacock brooch and the butterfly miraculous on Gabriel's shirt. His suspicions are somewhat confirmed. It's evident now more than ever that Gabriel has the peacock miraculous. He is Shadow Moth, however, Felix still needed to be sure. This leads us to the whole fake ring situation. However, quickly, I just wanted to bring up that it's good that the peacock miraculous was in the hands of someone Felix knew, meaning it's a lot easier for him to take the miraculous. It also makes the situation that much more dangerous though, because mind you, the reason why Felix wants the miraculous is because not having the miraculous puts his life in danger. Colt having the ring almost cost Felix his life. He cannot stand having his life strung above his head all of the time. He needs it for his own safety. Just like Colt, Gabriel is not fond of Felix. He doesn't like him at all. If anyone were to do harm to Felix, it would be Gabriel, excluding Colt. Pretty much confirmed with what happens in the episode at one point. So it's like, yes, someone Felix knows having the Peacock Miraculous is good. However, that person being Gabriel, not good. It just means that his life is still in danger. Anyway, Felix ends up giving back the ring he stole, but in actuality, he gives Gabriel a fake one. Not particularly because he wanted to keep the Graham Vanilli twin ring, which, yes, that was a part of it, but the reason why he did goes all the way back to the episode Feast. In this episode, we discover that the person who holds the Peacock Miraculous can sense an amok within an item. Felix made an exact replica. No one would actually be able to tell the difference between the real ring and the fake one. That is, unless you can sense the amok, or technically sense no amok.
I know each and every scratch on Emily's ring.
It's a fake ring. He gave me a fake ring. How dare he?
So because Gabriel instantly knew that it was fake, Felix was able to confirm that Gabriel had the miraculous and couldn't sense the amok in it. This leads us to the confrontation scene, which in my opinion is one of the things that sent Felix over the edge. I think everything that has ever happened up until now has been leading up to Felix taking the miraculous, but this by far takes the cake.
How do you plan to make me do that? By using your powers, Shadow Moth?
I am Gabriel Agreste, and I do indeed have every power I need to find my wife's ring, including the power to destroy your life. I don't need to be Shadow Moth for that. And now you know that I only need to snap my fingers to make you disappear from here.
You wouldn't dare.
Do you want to take that risk, Felix? Think of your mother.
No, Gabriel was wild for that one. What? Jaw on the floor every time I see that, because, excuse me? It's so bad on its own, but when you remember what Colt did to Felix, that would be my last straw. Essentially, Gabriel threatens to off Felix if he doesn't give the ring back. At the end of the day, it was an empty threat. You can only kill a Senti by releasing the amok, which can only be done one of two ways. One, breaking the item, two, snapping your fingers. Gabriel threatens the latter. However, because this Gabriel didn't have the miraculous or Felix's ring, it's physically impossible for him to do that. He can't just snap his fingers and Felix is gone. You have to have one of the items. So because this Gabriel doesn't have the Peacock Miraculous and he doesn't have the ring, he would have never actually harmed Felix. But mind you, this is just Senti Gabriel that was harmless. He was the only one that didn't have the miraculous. Gabriel's threat was real because he does actually have something that could get rid of Felix. So even though it was an empty threat with this Gabriel, it's not an empty threat because that's not the real Gabriel. Him even saying that means that he was thinking of doing it and he would do it, which obviously just like furthers the idea that Felix's life is in danger if he doesn't have the Peacock Miraculous. Anyway, Felix caught on pretty quickly that Gabriel was just a Senti, hence why he cuts the bottom of Gabriel's pants with his button thing. He needed to prove that they were in fact two different beings, which of course he does successfully. So not only does this 100% confirm that Gabriel is Shadow Moth, but it also adds more validity to Gabriel's past statement about snapping Felix out of existence. Like I said, Felix wasn't safe. His life was constantly being dangled above his head while Colt had the ring. Felix finally gained back the ring, which was a sigh of relief. However, it wouldn't last long because, as Felix said,
he understood that the amulet that had allowed his mother to give him life could also take it away.
He was officially back to square one, constantly fearing for his life. Like I've already mentioned and will continue to mention, Felix's actions are truly a matter of life and death. He had an urgency to save himself, which made him think irrationally, not care about other people or their well-being. It's not okay what he did and what he's done, but too many people see this kind of stuff as just purely selfish. And like, yeah, it is selfish. Yeah, he has no regard for Ladybug and what stealing the miraculous would do. It's a horrible thing to do, but this is a matter of life or death. It's not just personal desire or gain. Like, he needs the miraculous to simply live, simply exist. Obviously, we'll get more into this in the finale in season 5, but I think it's so important to emphasize this. Anyway, that being said, it's time to get into Risk and Strike Back. In my opinion, this is the most pivotal point in terms of Felix's character development. People always say it gets worse before it gets better, and this is 100% the case with Felix. Honestly, there are so many things that happen in these episodes. However, I don't think a lot of it is really crucial in terms of Felix's character development. Plus, analyzing both episodes would take all day, and we're already 161 slides in. Okay, I ain't doing all that. But a quick rundown, Gabriel sends Adrian off to do, I don't even know. I don't know, don't remember, don't care. Adrian doesn't want to go. Felix notices and proposes that he swap places with Adrian. Felix says it's because he wants to protect and help Adrian out, but in reality, it was so that he could get close enough to steal the miraculous. This just furthers the idea of Felix hiding behind Adrian to justify his actions in his mind, which we'll get into later in emotion.
Here we go. Attach the brooch. Okay, that's done. The Kwame comes out of the jewel. Say the magic words, Dusu, spread my feathers. Dusu, spread my feathers! Huh? It's a fake!
Felix snoopes around, finds both Miraculous, the fake ones Gabriel planted in the episode Gabriel Regressed. On the train, Felix takes the Peacock Miraculous out, but he doesn't know how the Miraculous works yet, so he uses the Grimoire. Obviously, if you know how Miraculous works, you would find a Kwame knot coming out of the Miraculous really weird and really odd, but Felix didn't, so like you can tell that he just doesn't know a single thing about Miraculous. Obviously, he finds out it's fake. I can't imagine the horror. You finally have hope just to be put back to square one. Again, this poor boy. This is when he meets up with Ladybug and she gives him the dog Miraculous. This is where Felix learns more about the Miraculous and is shown firsthand how they work. He also finds out about Ladybug's yo-yo and how it's connected to the Miracle Box. Formidable is honestly one of my favorites. He's so cute. He's so adorable for one, but he also looks so happy to be fighting alongside the heroes. Once again, it furthers the idea that Felix was always planned to be the good guy and an actual hero. Like, Lila's never been used in this way, Gabriel's never been used in this way, but Felix was. That is foreshadowing, that is foreshadowing, I'm telling you. The heroes plan to teleport these Sentis into the sun, but Felix stays behind, simply watching from afar. Here's where I want to emphasize Felix's reaction, because this part is quite crucial in terms of fully understanding emotion, and I just realized I did not talk about this in the part where I was talking about emotion. I totally forgot to add this to the slideshow. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
Felix literally watches 3 Sentis falling into the sun. We know Felix is very sympathetic and caring for all the Sentis, yet all Felix does is say, "I'm sorry," and walk off. Obviously, he looks heartbroken. You can tell he's sad that he wasn't able to save them, but he's not down on his knees crying. He doesn't fall into the ground and ball up into a fetal position. Like I said, I forgot to clarify this stuff, so I'll just say it now. But essentially, a lot of people will try to claim that Felix fell to the ground in emotion because he was so sad that he had to snap the Senti out of existence. That is not the case. I have always said that Felix cried at the end of Emotion because he realized he was his father, and that is something we will get into later, but that's why he was crying at the end of Emotion. That's why he fell to the ground. That's why he was curling up in the fetal position, because he had that realization. It wasn't about the Senti, and this almost confirms it, because he literally watches Sentis being thrown into the sun and he does not care. He cares, but he doesn't do anything about it. In what world is snapping Red Moon worse? Which, mind you, Red Moon is an object Senti. Felix does not care about object Sentis. These beings were real beings, and they got thrown into the sun and he did not care, but he cared about a moon? No, that's not what's going on, okay? Anyway, Felix leaves and then begins his get the real Peacock Miraculous back plan. He makes a deal with Gabriel that he would give him all of the Miraculous and the ring if he got the Peacock Miraculous. Gabriel accepts, Marinette loses all the Miraculous, and Felix is now the owner of the Peacock Miraculous. One thing I really need people to understand about Felix's character is that basically his whole story is just him slowly becoming his father, which I kind of mentioned about the whole emotion, crying stuff. Emotion is what sustains this, but I do think that Strike Back is the first taste of that. We see Felix going off the rails a bit. This was the craziest, most careless thing he has done to date. In my opinion, it is really a reflection of his father and what focusing on magic and using magic with evil intent will do to you. And that is why I say these episodes are some of the most pivotal. It's yeah, he had become his father in Emotion, but I think that Risk and Strike Back is really what sets that up, if I'm being completely honest. I think there were signs of him acting like his father through all of the episodes, but I think this is the one that hammers it into the grave. The last little thing I wanted to emphasize in terms of Strike Back is the very ending.
Stealing your dreams, harnessing your deepest fears.
I knew that Felix wasn't evil, or at least he wouldn't end up being a villain, or like the new Hawkmoth, before season 4 had come out. But even then, that moment is what solidified that Felix wasn't evil for me. So if you're just listening to this, the scene we just watched is when Hawkmoth was going on his tangent about Lord knows what. And there's a clip of Felix he's on the train. He has the Peacock Miraculous in his hand, and then he balls up his fist and then puts it to his heart, and then he closes his eyes and he's smiling. All I see on his face is just pure relief. His facial expression does not scream, "I'm evil and needed a Miraculous to carry out my malicious plans." It's giving, "I'm finally at peace for once in my life. The likelihood of my life coming to an end isn't being dangled above my head anymore." And honestly, knowing what we know about Felix and his story, we know that that is most certainly the case. For once in his life, he's actually safe and free. No one can harm him. Do you understand the relief? that he must be feeling. I mean, it's literally like coming out of a life or death situation. 14 years. For 14 years, his life was not his own. He was in constant danger, or at least could be in danger. Obviously, how he got to a point like this is completely screwed. It's messed up, for sure. However, as always, I do think that it is important to emphasize the reason. Two things can be true at once. And what's true is that what he did was horrible. How he got the Peacock Miraculous is horrible. But what's also true is that Felix did need the Peacock Miraculous in order to be safe, to live his life, to not be in constant danger. Okay, so as you can tell, it has been a hot minute. It's been a while. It's currently about 11 p.m. I originally stopped because I needed to get things done, and I was just gonna finish recording tomorrow, but honestly, I'm so tired, and I just want to get this over with and done with. So here we are. Welcome to like late night talks with Lizzie. I feel like, honestly, I'm a hot mess. I feel like the lighting is a hot mess. Everything's a hot mess, but we're just gonna roll with it, okay? Anyway, we still have a lot of slides, but not like the most in the world, so hopefully we can get through this pretty quickly and we can be done. So, with all of that being said, it's officially time to get into season 5. The first time we see Felix is in multiplication. This episode establishes that Amelie was working alongside Felix, because obviously Amelie gets Felix and she's like, "Mommy's here to protect you from anyone who thinks you're a monster." I think that's what she says. So she knows what's going on, and I think she knows a lot. And like, Felix and Amelie are really, really close, so it makes sense that he would have opened up to her, kind of in the way that he like opened up to Kagami when he got together with her, especially because of like stuff that happens in emotion between Felix and Amelie. Like it's very obvious that they know as much as each other, and they do work together a lot. It also shows Felix meeting Dusu for the first time, essentially just further setting up the episode emotion. Like, he's literally not really in multiplication that much at the end of the day, mainly because it's just there to like semi set up emotion, which means it's finally emotion time, which I feel like I brought up emotion like a million different times, but I think that's just because so much of Felix and his character arc and stuff, it all just comes down to emotion. Everything we've talked about so far all leads up to this moment, like I was saying. Hopefully all of the loose ends throughout the slideshow will be tied up and explained in this bit. Speaking of loose ends, I wanted to bring back some old points. 1, Felix's anger. 2, he was never doing things for Adrian and Kagami but hiding behind them. And 3, everything he's done was out of self-defense in a way. So 1, Felix's anger. Here's what we know. Colt hurt Felix for 13 years. Felix was only free after Colt died, and then wasn't fully free until he got the Peacock Miraculous at the end of season 5. We know anger and lashing out are common results of child use, but imagine adding no justice on top of that. Someone harms you, and they leave you to sit with what they did. No apology, no consequences, nothing. That is not always easy to deal with, and most certainly adds fuel to the fire. Also, Colt isn't the only one to threaten Felix. Gabriel also did. Definitely more fuel to the fire, for sure. You would think now that Felix is free, he would take a step back, but he didn't. He got worse, and it's all at the hands of what I just said, his anger and his lack of justification. And like, up until this point, you could say all of the things that he was doing, like all of his motivation was just about saving himself, but emotion directly confirms that that is not true, because he's not saving himself in any kind of way. He's already free, so there's literally like no true motive for doing literally anything in emotion except for just being angry and wanting to hurt people because he's hurting. I feel like in a roundabout way, him snapping people out of existence just made him feel better, because it's like as if he's snapping Colt out of existence. Like I said, he pretty much sees anyone who isn't a senti like Colt, so to snap them out of existence is like almost gaining justice for yourself. Obviously, by the end of emotion, he realizes that that's not the case, that's not how it works, but at the beginning, like, that's what he genuinely believed, and that's kind of like the reason for him doing what he did in emotion. Okay, and then 2, he was only hiding behind Kagami and Adrian. Think of it like this. All Gabriel wanted to do was destroy the world so he and Amelie could be together. However, doing that, saving her, is incredibly selfish and harmful. But in Gabriel's head, if he's doing it for the benefit of his son, then it's okay. If it's to make Adrian happy, he's not the bad guy, he's just a very loving and caring father. Obviously, that's not true, but that's what he had convinced himself in order to justify his own actions. And well, that, my friends, is exactly the same story with Felix. Like I said, Felix came out of everything so incredibly angry, as most people would. How dare his childhood get ripped away from him? How dare he not get justice? And how dare Gabriel threaten to take his life? At the end of the day, Felix wanted to hurt his father in the way that he had hurt him. He wanted to make him suffer because in his head, that was the only thing that would make him feel better. It was the only thing that would bring him peace. So it's like essentially just like getting revenge on someone who hurt you. He believed getting revenge is the only thing that would bring him justice and make him feel okay. Sound similar yet? I feel like we've talked about this before. I feel like there's a certain someone that we've talked about and explained this exact same thing. They were acting in the exact same way. Anyone want to guess who that person is? However, Colt wasn't around, so he took it out on everyone, the entire world. Obviously, Colt is gone, so he cannot direct his anger at Colt. So he directs it at anyone who he deems as like Colt, which is anyone who is not a Senti, except for like his mom and Marinette. Which kind of brings up the quote that but the thing that he said to Marinette, which was, "Look around, Marinette, they're the monsters." Like Marinette's like, "They're looking at me like I'm a monster," and he's like, "Nah, girl, you're not the monster. They are. Are you witnessing this?" Often when you come out of those situations, deep down, you know not everyone is bad, but you never know how or who to trust. As far as you're concerned, anyone and everyone could hurt you, which is, once again, like the main reason why Felix isolated himself. Now, really quickly, since I brought up trust, I wanted to talk about it. It's something that I've yet to bring up, but it's probably one of the most important. I talk about this a lot in my Feelagami versus Lukagami video, but lack of trust truly is at the core of Felix's actions. He didn't go to Ladybug for help because he didn't trust her. That's why Kagami is so crucial to his character. He needs someone trustworthy to guide him along, constantly reassuring him on who's safe and who isn't. Like, once again, I talk about this in the Lukagami versus Feelagami video, but often we see Kagami being like, "You can trust them," or like he's asking Kagami, "Can I trust you?" Or not you, but can I trust her? Can she be trusted? I think obviously he's getting to a point now, post redemption arc, where he can like trust people and he's willing to trust people. However, it is still a very hard thing, and so having someone like Kagami that can like reassure you and be like, "Yes, this person is okay. Yes, this person is safe," makes it a lot easier for someone like Felix to actually accept that. It's like he's willing to do it on his own. He could do it on his own. It's just like Kagami helps him with that at the end of the day. Which, like, speaking of trust, this actually brings me to Marinette in the episode. One of the most significant aspects of emotion is the moment between Marinette and Felix. It is a pivotal point in his character development. Why? Because she was the first person he trusted on his own. And that's what's like very important. It's not like Kagami was pushing him along. It's not like his mom was pushing him along. Nobody was telling him to trust Marinette. No one was pushing him to do that. He deliberately chose to trust her on his own, which, if you've been paying attention to anything that we've said previous to now, that has been a really hard thing for Felix coming out of a situation like that with his father. It's not easy to do stuff like that. So for him to actively do that on his own, and for it to be the first person, like for Felix to trust people now, to do that on his own, it's like, well, yeah, because he already trusts people. He's already started that process. But at this point, he hadn't really trusted literally anyone. So I just think it's so important that the first person that he trusted was someone that he deliberately picked on his own. It's not someone Kagami chose for him. Like, he did this on his own, and that is amazing growth.
Adrian! And I also wanted to tell you that I love you, and that I know you're doing your best, which is already totally amazing. And that we'll see each other tomorrow at school. Have fun tonight.
Okay, so let's talk about like what happened between Marinette and Felix. So Marinette goes to the dance to tell Adrian, quote unquote, that she loves him and that it was okay that he had to go to this dance. He could trust her and tell her anything. She then goes to leave, but Felix grabs her hand and they dance. Felix eventually opens up to her saying, "Look closer, Marinette. They're the monsters."
All eyes are on you.
They're looking at me like I'm a monster.
Look closer, Marinette. They're the monsters.
You're not Adrian.
After this, Felix transforms into Argos, and all hell breaks loose. He snaps everyone out of existence except for Kagami and Marinette. In fact, he deliberately takes Marinette to a safe space and hides her away so he knew she wouldn't be snapped out of existence. But she's not a senti, so why? Let's go back to the beginning. If you remember back in the episode Felix, Marinette sends a very loving, comforting message to Adrien. This is what we had to say about it. Obviously, we were pointing out the difference between like his reaction to everyone else and then Marinette, how he looked hurt, and it was almost like he was believing what she said, but he still believed that everyone else is evil, and like that kind of overtook him. So then what we said was she was confessing her love to Adrien. She was telling him that no matter what, he could count on her and that she'd always be there for him. Pretty similar to emotion, can't lie. There's so much hurt in his eyes, obviously after hearing her say that. Could come from never experiencing this kind of love, or potentially it's a look of despair, like a part of him was regretting what he was about to do because of how much she seemed to care. However, it's also important to note how quickly his expression changed back. So that's what we had to say about Felix. So like I said, at first he thought it was just some facade. He was touched by it, you can see the hurt in his eyes, but his lack of trust just truly made him believe that it wasn't genuine, that it couldn't be, hence why the hurt quickly turns into malice, as he states, pathetic. But this was different. There was no motive for this. In fact, Marinette was risking a lot to show that love to Adrien. For once in Felix's life, he saw that love, genuine love, and believed it, and boom, just like that, he knew Marinette could be trusted. All on his own. And like, to be honest, that's why I genuinely think that the interaction between Felix and Marinette obviously was indirectly because it was on the phone. But anyway, that interaction in Felix is so crucial because I don't think that he would have been as willing to trust Marinette and believe what she had said in emotion if that had not happened. Because, like I said, this is not the first time that Marinette had been showing that kind of love and comfort to Adrien. And before, it was just a video call that all of his friends were doing. But this, she showed up unannounced. She was risking everything just to talk to him, just to tell him that she loved him, to hug him. That is like true love right there. And it was so strong that even like Felix couldn't deny that. Like he realized that, hey, maybe all people that aren't sentis aren't bad. At the end of emotion, he literally, I think Amelie was like, they're all monsters. And he hugs her and he's like, not all of them. That was in reference to Marinette. It's like, not only did he see that love, but it's like that love was proven to him in a way. And yeah, I don't think that emotion would have happened in the way that it did if he hadn't been like shown that before. Anyway, moral of the story is like him trusting Marinette is one of the most important aspects of emotion, and specifically his change, eventual change. I wholeheartedly believe his facial expression is him believing that. So like as Marinette's telling him this, he has a very specific expression. It kind of reminds me of the expression we saw when he was watching the video, except this one is a little bit more genuine and hopeful. It's not as sad. It also kind of looks a little bit regretful in a way, which honestly makes sense. Like her showing him all of that love and care made him regret the fact that he was like gonna snap her out of existence, which is like the reason why I think he ended up saving her. He's like, I kind of like you too much to snap you out of existence, so I'm still gonna go with the plan, but I'll just save you. But then also as he's dancing with Marinette, or like grabs Marinette's hand, he looks really, really happy. And it genuinely reminds me of the way that he looks at his mom. Like you can just tell that he genuinely believes that she is a safe space. I think a lot of people have interpreted this look and this moment as like, oh my gosh, Felix clearly had a crush on Marinette, like he was in love with her. I don't think so. I think the facial expression gives like mom, like the way he looks at his mom, which kind of makes people interpreting it as romantic kind of weirdly. But yeah, there's definitely not like any kind of I'm in love with you look. It's just pure adoration and love. I don't know, it was just this thing that he had never seen before or experienced before. That's why he grabs her hand. That's why he chooses to dance with her. I think he's happy to know that there's someone else out there that he could genuinely lean on if he needed to, in the way that he leans on his mom and stuff. Like I said, this moment is super important for his character development. Not only did he hurt Adrien and Kagami, but he also hurt someone he deemed safe. So kind of going back to when Marinette snapped out of existence and like Adrien and Kagami are getting mad at Felix, I think he was kind of freaking out in that moment because one, like I said, he had hurt Adrien and Kagami, but also by snapping Marinette out of existence, he was taking away someone that he deemed safe, that he loved, that he adored, that he had come to care for, which is very reminiscent of the friends section that we talked about in like the pre-miraculous section. The fact that he had become so careless with the people that he had come to love is the reason why he changed. But hold on, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We went on a little bit of a tangent, so let's get back to our original statement. We went on a major tangent. Oh my goodness. So far from what we were talking about earlier. But yeah, just know that him snapping Marinette out of existence wasn't just affecting Adrian and Kagami, it was actually also affecting him because he had grown fond of her and he had basically ripped her away from himself, like I said, kind of in the way that he might have done with other friends, or Colt had done with his other friends, other people that he had deemed as a safe space. But anyway, okay, going back to the actual original statement, we were saying Felix was he was hiding behind Adrian and Kagami in his actions in this episode. Felix was angry and he wanted to hurt people, however, he couldn't just do that. Plus, Adrian and Kagami later on really did need saving, so he hid behind that. Emotion was never about saving Adrian, it was always about getting revenge. He couldn't hurt his father, so that turned into him wanting to just make everyone who he deemed just like his father, aka anyone who wasn't a Senti, his mom, or Marinette, suffer for it. He was hurt, but he wouldn't face it. Instead, he just made it another person's problem. Sounding familiar? Again, I'm pretty sure you've already talked about this with another person. Also, he was so sick of Gabriel, his control, and his threats, which is why Gabriel was one of the first people he targeted, which, like, honestly, you can hate Felix all you want for what he did in Emotion. You can say it was, like, the worst thing imaginable, but you cannot say that that was not the most satisfying thing in the world. Watching Gabriel being snapped out of existence, that's like waking up on Christmas morning. Felix was so valid for snapping Gabriel out of existence. I don't care. Someone needed to put him in his place, and I'm so glad that it was Felix. Also, what Felix did in Emotion also ties back to the isolation. Once again, Felix believes the only way to be happy and free is to not have anyone else around. So by snapping everyone out of existence, it eliminates any possible threat. Kind of like ignoring trauma instead of facing it head on. And just like that, we are almost on to the redemption arc section. However, first of all, I wanted to bring back the third point I made about doing everything out of self-defense. Prior to season 5, what he did, though very wrong, could be considered self-defense. His life was at risk by not having the miraculous. However, it is important to clarify that what's done in Emotion is not self-defense in any kind of way. He's safe, he doesn't need to do more, but he does, and that's what makes him a villain. I genuinely think this is one of the most important things to realize when setting up the end of Emotion and the beginning of his redemption arc. There are no explanations other than that he was angry and wanted to take revenge, which is very reflective of a certain someone. Yet again, how many times have I said this? The parallels are paralleling. Anyway, that being said, we are on to the redemption arc. So we are finally on part 1, section... Why does it say section 1? This is meant to say section 3. Anyway, that's just a mistake. I'm sorry. Section 3 redemption arc. I've said sounding like someone about 1,000,000 times, and for good reason. I wanted to draw your attention to some details before saying it outright. Hopefully by now things have clicked in your head, but if not, here you go. Felix had become his father. I mean, it is so obvious. Like, with everything that I have said, everything that Felix is doing is an exact parallel of Colt and what Colt was doing to Felix. And you know, anytime I bring this up, there's always people being like, nah, that's not bad. You cannot say that there are not parallels. You cannot say that Felix is not literally a replica of his father. Was he as extreme as Colt? No. But you can't deny that his actions are an exact reflection of Colt, especially if you've watched this whole video. Anyway, everything in terms of Felix's character arc has been leading up to him turning into his father. I hope you understand that. Every tiny little piece has been adding up to this moment where Felix turned into his father. He became exactly the person that he wanted nothing to do with. So Colt isolated Felix. He ripped away anyone and everyone that Felix loved to make him suffer. And what did Felix do? He snapped everyone Kagami and Adrian loved out of existence. He isolated them from the world, thinking it would make them happy, but it just destroyed them. Felix knows that better than anyone. Like, truly, at the end of the day, I think Colt's biggest thing was isolating Felix, ripping him away from anyone that brought him love and comfort to make him suffer. And it's like, Felix did not intend to make Kagami and Adrian suffer, but that is exactly what happened, because this is what happens when you snap people out of existence that they care about. So it's like, okay, here's the thing. They are the same, but they're also different because the intentions were different. Felix ended up doing the exact same thing that his father did, except he was doing it because he thought that something good would happen. Colt was doing that stuff because he knew nothing good would happen. Obviously, that doesn't make what Felix was doing any better. However, I feel like it does in a way justify his redemption arc. I just think that intention plays a really big role. He was never doing things to particularly be evil. That was just, I guess, like an outcome of it. This whole time, Felix had deemed himself a hero, or at least he was trying to be one. He had deemed everyone else to be like Colt, and for himself to be a completely separate thing. Like, he was better than them. He was better than all of them. Like, he was a hero, everyone else was the villain. Snapping everyone out of existence was him being the savior in a world full of villains, in a world full of people like Colt. I mean, we've always seen Felix as the villain because that's what he's been, but Felix, wanting nothing to do with Colt, wanting to be different and better than him, never saw that. It wasn't until the moment that he saw Marinette was gone that he finally made that connection. And that is, like, I think what's important. It's like, it's not like Felix was becoming his father deliberately. He was trying to do things differently, but through doing things differently, he ended up doing the exact same thing that Colt was doing. And the reason why, I feel like, just comes down to their motivation in a way. Like, anger and hurt and jealousy and fear were all things that fueled Colt's actions. We know that for a fact. And though Felix's story is very, very different, those are the exact same things that fueled his actions. So it makes sense that he would end up doing the exact same thing that Colt did, despite not wanting to do what Colt did, trying to do the opposite.
Ta-da! Huh? That's weird. I don't understand. She should come back. Something's wrong. I can usually bring back whoever I want, but it's like she's nowhere. Like she's completely gone. I'm sorry, Adrian.
Sorry? You're sorry?
You're not even in control of your own power. Don't you realize what you've done? Bring everyone back, now! Okay, all right. I never meant to hurt you two.
Notice the instant switch up with Felix. He goes into a panic. He backs up and frantically tries to explain and apologize. It's in this moment that Adrian and Kagami are the most upset and hurt. It's also important to take note of his words right before bringing everyone back. I never meant to hurt you two. This shows us Felix's remorse and shows us that moment of realization. And that moment of realization is just like furthered by Felix's speech to Red Moon. Like, by having Marinette being gone, he was once again like ripping away all of the people that loved and cared for Adrian and Kagami away from them, but also Felix himself had, grown, I guess, an attachment. I know it happened really fast, but in a way it kind of grown an attachment to Marinette, and to have that gone, like to have Marinette gone, it kind of brings back everything that Colt did to Felix. And I think because of that, in this moment, he realizes, oh, I have just done exactly what my father did. All of the ways that my father hurt me, yeah, I'm doing those exact same things to the people that I love and that I care of, that I'm trying to protect. I am hurting those people in the exact same way that his father had hurt him. It's also essential to note Felix's reaction to Adrian, Kagami, and Marinette's reunion.
Kagami! Adrian! I'm here! I'm fine!
Marinette! I was so scared.
We know trust and letting people in have always been a struggle for Felix. That's why he isolates. But I think this moment makes Felix regret all of it. He didn't want to be isolated. He wasn't gaining anything from it. What he was yearning for was those relationships and connections. That's what he needed in order to be okay and happy. He didn't need to be a villain or get rid of people. He needed friends and a support system. I think this moment is when Felix realizes that. He sees them hugging and showing genuine love, and that's all he needs, and that's all he really wants. I think he looks very upset at them having that connection because he doesn't have that, and that's what he really wants. That's all he needs at the end of the day. Like, Once again, I think it's this moment of him realizing that he was his father, that he had been doing everything that his father had been doing, not only to other people, but also to himself. Yes, he was being a villain to other people, but he was also being a villain to himself because he wasn't allowing himself to do things in the same way that Colt wasn't allowing him to do things. Colt wasn't allowing him to be happy. Felix wasn't allowing himself to be happy. Colt wouldn't allow him to have relationships with anyone, connections to anyone. Felix wasn't allowing himself to have connections or relationships to anyone. I think it was genuinely in this moment that he realized that he was just like self-sacrificing. In a way, he was truly just harming himself. And like he could have relationships like this if he actually tried, but he wasn't trying, and that's the downfall of it all. At the end of the day, he was kind of a villain to his own story, and I think that's like another big reason as to why he was willing to change. At the end of the day, all he's doing is just damaging himself further. So two things are true. One, Felix wanted nothing to do with his dad, but somehow ended up doing the exact same stuff Colt was doing. And two, Felix realized isolating wasn't doing him any good. It was bad for Colt to do it, so doing it to himself was just further destroying what Colt had already destroyed. So all of this tells us that Felix is not the kind of person he wants to be, and that is why he changed. It had nothing to do with him wanting to date Kagami. He wanted to become a better person. He wanted to become the hero he always saw himself as. It was all about bettering himself for the good of himself. He genuinely wanted to save Kagami and Adrian, not just use them as an excuse to take revenge anymore. He never did any of this because he thought he'd get something out of it. Felix is very selfish, yes. He does things for personal gain, yes, but this was nothing more than bettering himself for the little boy inside that was constantly told that he was a monster. He is not his father, and he wanted to prove it. He's always believed he wasn't his father. Now it's time for him to not be his father and show that he's not his father with his actions and what he does. He needed to feel okay. He wanted to feel okay, and that is not possible unless he himself makes a change in himself and he himself becomes a better person, becomes the person that he used to be when he was younger, a person that he wants to be. He wants to be a hero. He always has been. I mean, not always has been, but he's always wanted to be. And before, what he wanted and what he did not reflect each other. So now he wants what he does and what he wants to reflect each other. So not only does he believe he's a hero, but he like actually is a hero, and he's actively trying to be a hero. The other side of this that I wanted to talk about is the whole revenge thing, because it is a really huge part. Not only did he realize that he was his father, but he also realized just how damaging it really is to get revenge. While seeking revenge, dig 2 graves, one for yourself. That is honestly one of my favorite quotes. It's from Douglas Horton. I actually used this quote as like the opening statement for an essay that I wrote about Hamlet, which is actually one of my favorite examples of revenge and the effects of it. And I feel like a lot of Hamlet honestly kind of reminds me of Felix and his story. Revenge sounds like a good idea, but all it does is harm yourself and give the wrongdoer more power. Colt was doing everything to make Felix suffer, to never live happy. Felix, by doing what he was doing, aka getting revenge, is giving Colt exactly what he wanted. Felix wasn't happy, he was destroying himself and others. That is also something he realizes at the end of Emotion. At the end of the day, if there's one thing you get out of this video, I hope it's that the best revenge one can give is moving on and being happy. It's way easier said than done, but honestly, harming people who harm you is once again just giving them power, because you cannot destroy someone without destroying yourself. Felix choosing to change and choosing to become a better person and finding people who will love and comfort him is completely going against what Colt wanted. By doing so, he's harming Colt and giving himself the power. People destroy you and harm you to make you hurt. And by trying to hurt them back, all you're doing is just hurting yourself more, because honestly, if you hurt them, they probably don't even care. By harming them, you're not even gonna do what you wanted. It's not gonna have an effect in any kind of way. You're just destroying yourself for absolutely no reason, which once again gives them the upper hand because they wanted to make you hurt to begin with. Also, yes, Colt is gone, but still the rhetoric is the same. Like, he's still harming Colt by becoming a better person. Colt will always be in Felix's mind, and that's the Colt Felix needs to destroy. Being happy is the only way to truly move on. Show that person that what they did to you doesn't affect you, that you can still live your life and be happy despite what they say and despite what they do, because that will make them hurt. That is the only good revenge. Plus, if you're being happy and you let things go, you're not focusing on the negative. You're not focusing on that person, which at the end of the day, focusing on that person and focusing on the negative is what makes you go crazy. Like I said, it's easier said than done, but truly it is the best thing you could ever do. Be happy and move on. Have a good life. That's why Felix's behavior changed. Like I've said a million times, that gentle side has always been there, but since changing, he's tapped into it more. Essentially, he's becoming the person he was before Colt really got to him, and that is beautiful. That is exactly what he should be doing. Happiness is the best revenge, and Felix, I think, is proving that every single day. Not only is he a better person, but Colt, somewhere in his grave, he's rolling in his grave. He has become the good person Colt never wanted Felix to be or believed Felix could be. And that's the best revenge anyone could give. That is honestly the best kind of outcome from a situation like this. He's also getting to a point where he can start building up a support system, and I cannot wait to see Felix making friends and interacting with people. He's finally allowing himself to have what he needs, and that is amazing. Like I said, he's pretty much so used to Colt's destructive behaviors that it ended up turning into his own internal self-destructive behaviors. And so I think to change and to not be that person anymore, you are fully letting go of Colt and the part of him that still had a grasp on Felix's life, because even though he's gone, he would always still be there. He would always be like on his shoulder. To change himself and to change the parts of him that were still being affected by Colt, that were still being controlled by Colt, is amazing. He really is moving on from it in the best way. Now, really quickly, I wanted to say this. Even though this is the case, I do think it's important to note that Felix is still Felix at the end of the day. Not everything Felix has done was a direct link to Colt. Some of his behavior and the way he acts, the way he talks, the way he looks, like not all of that was a direct link to what he had been through with Colt. He has a personality, and you know, sometimes that personality is just a-hole. Yes, Felix will still be mean sometimes. So is Kagami. Kagami, oh my gosh. Some people are like really confused about how Felix is going to be acting in season 6. I'm like, just take a look at Kagami. We know who she is. We know how she acts. Just apply that to Felix, and that's exactly who it is. Like, yes, he's very happy. He's very smiley. He's very golden retriever energy, but he's still going to be mean at some points because that's just who he is. Like, that's who Kagami is. She has her nice moments. She has her mean moments. That's just who we are. Who she is. Who he is. So if Felix does still act like that, he's still mean, and he's not like super sweet and kind all of the time, don't automatically think it means he's evil. He's not. He's just Felix. Anyway, by now I think we've gone over everything in terms of his redemption arc. Obviously, I probably missed a few points here and there, and honestly, we could have dove into like pretension and representation and then the ending and blah 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 blah, but I feel like we would just be like reiterating a lot of the stuff that we've already said, like in emotion. I think focusing on the change within emotion is honestly like the best thing that we could do. But yeah, like I said, I probably missed some talking points within his character development, but I feel like we hit a lot of the big ideas, and I feel like you get the gist of it. Anyway, that takes us to part 2, the why section. There's not a whole lot to say in this section, but I do want to go over a couple things. First of all, why did he deserve a redemption arc after everything he's done? Well, to me, it comes down to the reason he got a redemption arc in the first place. The theme of Miraculous is that you are not your parents. I think this TikTok I posted sums it up. So I said, how do you know Felix isn't evil? Like, in quotes, so someone saying that to me. I said, same reason why Gabriel was monarch, but Adrian is the hero. Same reason why Ivan's story and his fears of being his father was made into an episode. Abused kids, teenagers, adults are not destined to become the abusers. You are not the people who hurt you. You are not your parents. You are a hero in a generational world of villains. And if you are a hurt person who hurt people, it's okay. You can and should come back from it. You can change to be a better person as long as you're willing. In fact, that's the whole theme of Miraculous. Breaking the cycle. Breaking the cycle. Simple as that. The whole point of Miraculous is to tell kids that they are not destined to become their parents, despite what BS society tells them. Oh, but the statistics. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it is likely. Statistics are things for a reason, but it doesn't have to be that way. You are your own person. Bad behavior isn't inherently genetic, and you are not doomed just because people who created you are like that. I think the biggest reason why there are statistics out there like that is because of stupid people saying that. I mean, back in the day, we didn't have the resources, the mental health help and things back then that we do now. So there's generations and generations of lack of that, which is why we had those patterns. But now we have tools to help us. And I feel like all you really need in order to change is someone right by your side coaching you, saying you're not your parent. You can become a good person. Just because you were hurt doesn't mean you're going to hurt other people. Like, I just think there's so much harmful rhetoric surrounding stuff like this, which is why Miraculous talks about these kinds of things. That's why they emphasize people like Adrian, people who had terrible parents, being the villain, but he's a hero, because it's so important that you kind of go against what society tells you and you tell kids that it is okay. Miraculous is important because instead of telling kids that they will end up becoming their parent if they are harmed in any kind of way, they're telling kids that they can be a hero even when their family is not. It's okay to have fears of becoming like your horrible parent, but you're not them and you won't become like them. Yeah, is it likely for people to end up like that? Yes. However, it's still important to bring up these things because people are not hopeless. They're not helpless. I mean, how many people have wanted to change, but they didn't have people telling them that it was okay to change, so they never did. I'm like, people are more likely to change if you coach them in that kind of way. Obviously, there are some people who won't change, aka Chloe, but a lot of people will change, like Felix. And I just think that it is so important to tell people that, hey, you won't become like your parent, and you know what, if you do, you can change. And I think that's just the main theme of Miraculous. That's the main point of it. Adrian is not his dad. Ivan is not his dad. Felix is not his dad. However, the difference between Felix and Adrian, like I've kind of been mentioning, is that Felix did become his father. Adrian did not, but that's realistic. Some people do. However, that doesn't automatically mean that you are doomed for life. You can and should come back from it. If Felix is forever the villain, then what does that tell kids? It just reestablishes harmful rhetoric, the same rhetoric Miraculous actively fights against. Mind you, Miraculous is a kid show. Almost all things portrayed in the show is to teach a kid a lesson. Kids are very influential, so it's important to spread these messages to kids. It's important to bring these kinds of things to kid shows. Like, I feel like in an adult show, yeah, you can have a character like Felix who is always the villain. But with a show like Miraculous, where there's a lot of kids that this show influences, it's much better to uplift a character like Felix, because once again, it helps teach kids in Felix's situation that you can become a hero, that you can become the good guy. And to be honest, I don't think you have to love Felix to see how important his story and his character development is. You can hate Felix all you want, but yeah, his story is very, very important for kids and teenagers and adults who are like Felix. Felix will not, and I mean will not, turn evil. And I think if you truly listen to the podcast episode, you'd be able to see that. But if you still have your doubts, remember, making Felix a villain again is just going against the morality of Miraculous. They would never do that. It's kind of like saying, if you became the bad guy, it's okay. You can become a good person. Oh wait, but actually I changed my mind, you can't. So screw you. Like, that is so stupid. Like, why build up his character development, add so much stuff to his character, make it this detailed, and make it such an important and crucial part of the story just to knock it all down? That is stupid. Anyone who tries to claim Felix is facing away and is running away in the intro because he's still evil simply does not understand his character, who he is, and his story. Like I said, Felix is one of the most mischaracterized characters in Miraculous. If you actually knew him as a character, I think you would know pretty much anything and everything that I said in this podcast episode, and you would be able to actually come to the conclusion that no, he's not the villain, and he wouldn't become the villain. That's stupid to believe that. And just like that, that is the end of this. Oh my goodness. I feel like we talked about so much, but I also kind of feel like we talked about nothing, and I feel like did I make any sense? And did I talk about anything of value? I don't know. I feel like there's so many things that I genuinely missed, but I also talked about way too much. I don't know. It's kind of all over the place, but moral of the story is, even if we did miss stuff, we're done with this episode specifically. It's time for the assignment again. So obviously at the beginning of the podcast episode, I had you write a little comment talking about Felix and like what you think about him, what you believe, blah, 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 blah. But now that we have gone through everything I've made, all of my points, I've made all of my statements, what I want you to do is go back and add to your comment. This time you're going to write any new ideas or opinions that you have. Obviously we dove really deep into Felix's character and his character development. If like any opinions that you had on Felix changed from the beginning, from like your original comment, feel free to like write about that. But yeah, essentially I just kind of want you to go back and like reflect on what you first wrote and kind of highlight some changes and like opinion changes, just like anything new. You can talk about what you learned, if you learned anything from this podcast episode, talk about any differing opinions or ideas that you have after watching this episode. Yeah, and also if you have any other talking points that you want to like bring up, or if there's anything else you want to discuss that you thought of while watching this podcast episode, feel free to list them, and like any questions you have, obviously you can list them and stuff. But yeah, that is officially my Felix Fathom character development redemption arc deep dive. Like I said, this is a video that I've been wanting to make for ages. Honestly, I didn't think that making this was going to be so complicated and hard, but you know what, we did it, we persevered, and yeah. Anyway, that is everything. Class dismissed.